The dust had barely settled on the grave when Millicent Fairchild realized she would spend the rest of her life haunted by a man she could never touch again. It was July 1878 in La Veta, Colorado, a mining town nestled against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the summer heat baked the earth until it cracked like old leather. Millicent stood in the modest cemetery on the hillside, wearing the same black dress she had worn to her wedding 3 years earlier, hastily dyed to mourn the man who had given her his name. Samuel Fairchild had been 26 when the mine collapse took him, along with 7 other men whose widows now stood scattered among the graves like ravens waiting for something that would never come. Millicent was 23, and she felt ancient. Her sister Louise touched her elbow gently. "Millie, we should go back to the house. People will be bringing food." But Millicent could not move. Her feet seemed rooted to the dry Colorado soil, her eyes fixed on the simple wooden cross that bore Samuel's name. She had loved him desperately, completely, with the kind of love that poets wrote about and that she had thought would sustain her forever. They had met in Denver, where her father worked as a banker, and Samuel had swept into her life like a summer storm, all passion and promises. He had brought her to La Veta with dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines, and she had followed him willingly because being with him had made her feel alive in ways she had never imagined possible. Now he was gone, and she was alone in a town where she knew few people beyond casual acquaintances, in a house they had rented with money they did not have, with debts Samuel had accumulated buying mining equipment and investing in claims that had produced nothing but disappointment. "Millie," Louise said again, more firmly this time. Millicent finally turned away from the grave, her movements mechanical. She walked down the hillside with her sister, past the other mourners who murmured condolences that sounded like distant wind. The whole world seemed muffled, as though she were underwater. She could see people's mouths moving but could barely comprehend their words. Nothing felt real anymore. The house was small, just 3 rooms that Samuel had promised would be temporary until they could afford something better. Now Millicent would have to leave it entirely because she could not pay the rent. Louise had already suggested she come back to Denver, move in with her and her husband George until she could figure out what to do with her life. The thought of returning to Denver, of living as a dependent in her sister's household, of facing the pity in her parents' eyes, made Millicent want to scream. But what choice did she have? A widow with no income, no skills beyond the accomplishments of a banker's daughter who could play piano and embroider pillowcases and speak a little French. She could perhaps find work as a governess or a companion to some elderly woman, but the thought filled her with a heavy despair. Everything ahead of her looked gray and empty. The neighbors brought ham and beans and cornbread, and Millicent sat in her small parlor accepting their sympathy with nods and murmured thanks. She felt like an actress playing a part, saying the right words while feeling nothing inside except a vast, aching emptiness. When everyone finally left and Louise retired to the small spare room, Millicent sat alone in the darkness, listening to the wind rattle the windows. She thought about Samuel constantly, the way he laughed, throwing his head back with genuine joy, the way he would grab her around the waist and spin her in circles until she was dizzy and breathless, the way he would cup her face in his calloused hands and kiss her like she was the most precious thing in the world, the way he would talk about their future, about the children they would have, the life they would build together. Every memory was a knife twisting in her heart. 3 weeks after the funeral, Millicent was packing her belongings into trunks, preparing for the journey back to Denver. Louise had returned home already to prepare the spare room, and Millicent was alone in the house, wrapping her dishes in newspaper and trying not to think about the fact that she was erasing the last physical traces of her life with Samuel. She was in the bedroom, taking Samuel's clothes from the wardrobe to donate to the church, when she found the letters. They were tucked in the pocket of his good Sunday coat, 3 envelopes addressed to him in a flowing feminine hand. The return address was from a woman named Catherine Miller in Colorado Springs. Millicent's hands shook as she opened the first letter. It was dated 2 months before Samuel's death, and it was written in the tone of intimate familiarity that made Millicent's stomach turn to ice. "My dearest Samuel," it began, "I have been counting the days until you can visit again. The time we spent together last month was not nearly enough. I find myself thinking of you constantly, of your promises to me, of the future we discussed. I know the situation is complicated, but surely you can find a way to resolve it soon. I have been patient, but my patience is not infinite. Write to me soon, my love. Yours always, Catherine." Millicent read the letter 3 times, each word searing itself into her brain. Then she opened the second letter, which was even more explicit in its affection and its expectation that Samuel would leave his wife. The third letter, dated just a week before his death, was angry. Catherine demanded to know why he had not visited as promised, why he had not written, whether he was reconsidering their plans. Millicent sank onto the bed, the letters clutched in her trembling hands. The man she had loved, the man she had mourned so desperately, had been planning to leave her. He had been having an affair with another woman, making promises to her while continuing to share Millicent's bed and accept her devotion. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. All those nights Samuel had claimed he needed to travel to Colorado Springs on mining business. All those times he had been distant and distracted. All those moments she had worried that something was wrong, and he had reassured her with kisses and lies. Everything she had believed about their love, about their marriage, about who Samuel was as a person, had been built on deception. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the letters into shreds. She wanted to dig up Samuel's grave and demand an explanation. Instead, she sat in the empty bedroom and cried until she had no tears left, great wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside her chest. When the storm of grief and rage finally passed, Millicent was left feeling hollow. She could not even mourn properly anymore because she did not know what she was mourning. Had Samuel loved her at all, or had their entire marriage been a lie? How long had the affair been going on? Had he truly planned to leave her, or had Catherine Miller been deluding herself? Millicent burned the letters in the stove, watching the paper curl and blacken. But she could not burn the knowledge they had given her. That night, she lay awake in the bed she had shared with Samuel, staring at the ceiling and feeling utterly lost. Her love for him had not disappeared despite the betrayal. That was perhaps the cruelest part. She still loved him, still missed him, still felt the ache of his absence. But now her love was tangled up with hurt and anger and confusion, and she did not know how to separate one feeling from another. When she finally left La Veta 3 days later, boarding the stage to Denver with her trunks and her shattered illusions, Millicent felt like she was leaving behind more than just a town. She was leaving behind the person she had been, the naive young woman who had believed in eternal love and happy endings. Denver felt suffocating. Louise's house was comfortable, and her sister and brother-in-law were kind, but Millicent felt like a ghost haunting their lives. She moved through the days mechanically, helping with household tasks and avoiding Louise's concerned questions. At night, she lay in the narrow bed in the spare room and thought about Samuel until her head ached. "I cannot forget him," she confessed to Louise one afternoon as they sat in the parlor doing needlework. The words burst out of her unexpectedly, breaking weeks of careful silence. "I know I should move on. I know I should try to build a new life, but I cannot stop thinking about him. Every moment of every day, he is there in my mind. And the worst part is that I do not even know who he really was. I loved someone who might not have existed except in my imagination. Louise set down her embroidery and took Millicent's hand. You are grieving, Millie. It takes time. You cannot expect to simply forget someone you loved so deeply. But I do not want to spend the rest of my life like this, Millicent said, her voice breaking. I do not want to be the sad widow who never recovers. I want to feel something other than this constant pain. I want to remember what joy feels like, but I do not know how to do that when I cannot even sort out what was real and what was not. Louise squeezed her hand sympathetically but had no answers. What answers were there? Time, people said. Time heals all wounds. But Millicent felt like time was only making things worse, each day adding another layer of confusion and hurt to the weight she was already carrying. A month passed, then two. Autumn came to Denver, painting the aspens gold on the mountainsides. Millicent found work as a piano teacher, giving lessons to the daughters of her father's banking associates. It gave her something to do with her days and a small income, so she did not feel like such a burden to Louise. But she still felt like she was sleepwalking through her life, going through the motions without really living. It was Louise who suggested she return to Lavetta. I know it might seem strange, she said over breakfast one morning in October, but you left so quickly after Samuel's death. Perhaps you need to go back and make peace with what happened there. Visit his grave, say a proper goodbye. It might help you find some closure. The idea made Millicent's stomach clench with anxiety. She had thought she would never return to Lavetta, that she would leave that chapter of her life firmly in the past. But as she thought about it over the following days, she began to wonder if Louise might be right. She had fled Lavetta in pain and confusion, and perhaps that was why she could not move forward. Perhaps she needed to face the place where her marriage had existed and ended, needed to confront her memories in the physical space where they had been made. 2 weeks later, Millicent was back on the stage to Lavetta, watching the landscape change from the rolling plains around Denver to the dramatic mountains of southern Colorado. The leaves were turning here too, splashes of gold and red against the dark green pines. The sky was that particular brilliant blue that only existed in the high country, and the air through the stage window was crisp and cool. Lavetta looked exactly the same, which somehow surprised her. The town had continued on without her or Samuel, people going about their daily business as though nothing had happened. Millicent took a room at the small hotel on Main Street, unpacking her carpet bag with hands that shook slightly. She did not know exactly what she hoped to accomplish here, but she knew she needed to try. The next morning, she walked up to the cemetery. The wooden cross on Samuel's grave had weathered over the past months, the letters of his name fading slightly. Millicent stood there for a long time trying to feel something definitive. Grief, anger, love, resolution, anything, but she just felt numb and tired. I do not know what to do, she said aloud to the grave. I cannot forget you, but I cannot keep living like this either. I need to find a way forward, but I do not know how. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and somewhere a crow cawed. No answers came from the grave, which was exactly what she had expected. Samuel was gone, and he had taken the truth about their marriage with him. She would never know what he had really felt, what he had really planned. She would have to find a way to live with that uncertainty. She was walking back down the hillside when she encountered the cowboy. He was riding a rangy bay gelding, coming up the road that led past the cemetery. When he saw her, he touched the brim of his hat politely and would have ridden past, but something made Millicent stop and watch him. Perhaps it was the kindness in his weathered face, or the gentle way he sat his horse, or simply the fact that she was desperate for any kind of human connection in this place that held so many painful memories. "Excuse me," she called out impulsively. He reined in his horse and turned to look at her inquiringly. "Madam." Now that she had his attention, Millicent was not sure what she wanted to say. She stood there on the dusty road, feeling foolish, while the cowboy waited patiently. He was probably in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of lean build that came from hard physical work. His eyes were a surprising shade of gray-green, and they looked at her with polite concern. "I am sorry," Millicent said finally. "I did not mean to bother you. I was just visiting the cemetery, and I suppose I am feeling a bit lost." The cowboy dismounted in one smooth motion, holding his horse's reins loosely. "No bother, madam. You look like you could use someone to talk to. I am Toby Xavier. Most folks call me Toby. Millicent Fairchild." She hesitated, then added, "I am visiting my husband's grave. He died in the mine collapse last summer." Recognition flickered across Toby's face. "I remember hearing about that. Terrible tragedy. I am very sorry for your loss." There was genuine sympathy in his voice, not the performative condolences she had endured at the funeral. Something about his straightforward kindness made Millicent feel like she could be honest with him. Perhaps it was because he was a stranger who knew nothing about her or Samuel. Perhaps it was because she was so tired of carrying her burden alone. "The truth is, I am having a very difficult time moving past it," she said. "I keep thinking about him constantly, but I am not even sure anymore what I am grieving. I found out after he died that he was having an affair, that he might have been planning to leave me. So now, I do not know what was real and what was not. I cannot forget him, but I also cannot make sense of any of it." She had not planned to say any of that, certainly not to a complete stranger. But once she started talking, the words poured out of her. Toby listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful and non-judgmental. When she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment, as though considering carefully what to say. "That is a heavy load to carry," he said finally. "Grief is hard enough without having to question everything you thought you knew. I cannot imagine how confusing and painful that must be." Millicent felt tears prick her eyes at his simple understanding. "I feel like I am stuck," she admitted. "I cannot move forward because I am trapped in the past, but the past does not make sense anymore. I do not know how to find my way out." Toby looked at her for a long moment, those gray-green eyes serious and kind. Then he said something that surprised her. "I will help you remember joy." Millicent blinked at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "What? Joy?" he repeated. "You said you are trapped in grief and confusion. Maybe what you need is not to sort out the past, but to remember that there are other things in life besides pain. Simple things that can make you happy, even for a moment. I have lived in this area my whole life, and I know places that might help you see the world differently. If you would like, I would be honored to show them to you." It was a strange offer from a man she had just met, and Millicent knew she should probably politely decline. But there was something in Toby's manner that made her trust him instinctively. He was not offering anything inappropriate or making any demands. He was simply extending kindness to someone who clearly needed it. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked. Toby smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. "Because I know what it is like to feel lost. A few years back, I went through something that nearly broke me. A good friend of mine took the time to remind me that life was still worth living. I suppose I would like to pass that kindness along." Millicent studied him, trying to read his intentions. All she saw was genuine compassion and a desire to help without expecting anything in return. It had been so long since anyone had offered her uncomplicated kindness that she found herself agreeing before she had fully thought it through. "All right," she said. "I would like that." Toby's smile widened slightly. "Good. Are you free this afternoon? I could show you the meadow up past Wahatoya Creek. The aspens are at their peak right now, and it is one of the most beautiful places I know." They agreed to meet at 2 o'clock at the livery stable. Toby would bring a gentle horse for her to ride. As Millicent walked back to her hotel, she felt a strange flutter of something in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps a tiny spark of curiosity. For the first time in months, she was going to do something other than grieve. Toby was waiting when she arrived at the livery, holding the reins of a sweet-faced mare with a white blaze. "This is Daisy," he introduced. "She is as gentle as they come. Even if you have not ridden in a while, she will take good care of you." Millicent had ridden as a girl, though it had been years. Toby helped her into the saddle with respectful efficiency, making sure her stirrups were adjusted properly before mounting his own horse. They rode out of town at an easy walk, following a trail that led into the foothills. The afternoon was warm for October, the sun bright overhead but without the brutal heat of summer. Toby did not try to fill the silence with chatter, which Millicent appreciated. They rode side by side, the horses' hooves clopping rhythmically on the hard, packed earth. Gradually, Millicent found herself relaxing into the motion, her body remembering the feel of being on horseback. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of pine and scrub oak. After about an hour, they emerged into a high meadow that took Millicent's breath away. Aspens surrounded the clearing, their leaves a brilliant gold that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. A small creek burbled through the center of the meadow, and the grass was still green despite the season. The whole scene had an almost magical quality, like something from a painting. Toby dismounted and helped Millicent down. "What do you think?" "It is beautiful," Millicent breathed. And it was. Standing there in that golden meadow with the mountains rising in the distance, she felt something inside her shift slightly. Not a healing, not yet, but a tiny crack in the wall of grief she had built around herself. They let the horses graze while they sat on a fallen log near the creek. Toby produced a canteen of water and a small package of cookies wrapped in cloth, which he shared with her. They were simple sugar cookies, slightly crumbly, and Millicent realized she could not remember the last time she had actually tasted food rather than just mechanically eating for survival. "You said you went through something difficult," Millicent said after a while. "If you do not mind me asking, what happened?" Toby was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the aspens. "I was engaged to be married about 4 years ago. Sarah was her name. We had known each other since we were children, and everyone in town assumed we would end up together. I thought I loved her, and I suppose in a way I did. But a month before the wedding, she ran off with a gambler who was passing through town. Left me a note saying she was sorry, but she could not marry me when she was in love with someone else." Millicent winced sympathetically. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Toby admitted. "Not just the heartbreak, but the humiliation. Everyone in town knew what had happened. I felt like such a fool. I considered leaving La Veta, starting over somewhere nobody knew me, but my friend Jake talked me out of it. He reminded me that running away would not solve anything, that I needed to figure out how to live with what happened and find a way to be happy anyway." "Did you?" Millicent asked. "Find a way to be happy," Toby considered the question. "Eventually. It took time and it was not easy. For a long while, I was angry and bitter. But slowly I realized that Sarah leaving was probably the best thing that could have happened. We would not have been happy together in the long run. She needed adventure and excitement, and I am not that kind of man. I am happiest here in these mountains, working with horses, living a quiet life. If she had married me, she would have ended up resenting me, and I would have spent my life trying to be something I am not. Millicent thought about that. How did you get from being bitter to accepting it? I stopped trying to understand why it happened and started focusing on what I wanted my life to look like going forward, Toby said. I could not change the past, and I could not make Sarah's choices make sense to me, but I could decide what to do next. So I started really thinking about what made me happy. Turned out it was simpler things than I had realized. Being out in nature, working with animals, having good friends, building something with my own hands. Once I started paying attention to those things instead of dwelling on what I had lost, life started feeling worth living again. Millicent absorbed his words, turning them over in her mind. But do you still think about her? Sometimes, Toby admitted. Especially at first, I thought about her constantly. But over time, those thoughts became less painful and less frequent. Now when I think about Sarah, I mostly feel grateful that we did not make the mistake of marrying when we were not right for each other. And I am grateful for what I learned about myself in the process of healing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the aspens. Millicent felt some of the tightness in her chest easing. There was something healing about being in this beautiful place with someone who understood loss without trying to minimize it or rush her through it. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said quietly. Toby smiled at her. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come. I know it cannot be easy, accepting help from a stranger." They stayed in the meadow until the shadows began to lengthen, then rode back to town as the sun started to sink toward the mountains. When they reached the livery stable, Toby helped Millicent dismount and walked her back to her hotel. "Would you like to do something tomorrow?" he asked. "There is a small lake up in the hills that is beautiful this time of year. We could pack a lunch and make a day of it." Millicent found herself agreeing without hesitation. That evening, alone in her hotel room, she realized she had gone several hours without thinking about Samuel. The discovery brought a mixture of relief and guilt. Was she betraying his memory by beginning to move forward? But then she remembered what Toby had said about focusing on what came next rather than dwelling on what had been lost. Maybe moving forward was not a betrayal. Maybe it was simply survival. Over the next week, Millicent saw Toby nearly every day. He took her riding through the foothills, showed her hidden springs where columbines grew even this late in the season, taught her to skip stones across the surface of a glassy pond. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Toby told her about growing up in La Veta, about learning to handle horses from his father, about his dreams of someday having his own ranch. Millicent told him about her childhood in Denver, about her love of music, about the books she had read and the places she had dreamed of seeing. Gradually, Millicent realized she was laughing again. Real laughter, not the polite sound she had been making for months. She was sleeping better too, falling into bed pleasantly tired from days spent outdoors, instead of lying awake wrestling with painful memories. Samuel was still there in her thoughts, but his presence was becoming less overwhelming, less all-consuming. Toby never pushed her to talk about Samuel or the betrayal, but he listened when she needed to process her feelings. One afternoon, as they sat by the lake, Millicent found herself telling him about the letters she had found, about the woman in Colorado Springs and Samuel's apparent plans to leave her. "The hardest part is not knowing what was real," she said, throwing pebbles into the water and watching the ripples spread. "I thought we were happy. I thought he loved me. But if he was planning to leave, were all those moments we shared just lies? Or did he love me at some point and then fall out of love? I will never know, and that not knowing is eating me alive." Toby was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the mountains across the lake. "I think people are complicated," he said finally. It is possible Samuel did love you and was also drawn to this other woman. It is possible he was confused about what he wanted. It is possible he made promises to both of you that he had no idea how to keep. None of that excuses what he did, but it also does not mean your entire marriage was a lie. How do I know what to believe? Millicent asked, frustrated tears stinging her eyes. Maybe you believe what you experienced, Toby suggested gently. You said there were times when you felt loved when you were happy. Those feelings were real, even if everything else was complicated. You cannot control what Samuel thought or felt or planned. You can only control what you do with your own memories and your own future. Millicent turned to look at him, this kind man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him. How did you get so wise? Toby laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I am not wise. I just had to figure out how to put myself back together once, and I remember what helped and what did not. Trying to understand Sarah's choices and make them make sense did not help. Accepting that I would never fully understand and focusing on my own healing did help. They rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, and Millicent felt something settling inside her. She was beginning to understand what Toby meant about choosing to move forward even without having all the answers. She might never know the full truth about Samuel's feelings or intentions. She might always carry some confusion and heard about how their marriage had ended. But she did not have to let that uncertainty define the rest of her life. That evening, Millicent wrote a long letter to Louise, telling her about Toby and the past week, and how she was beginning to feel like herself again. She described the meadows and the mountains, the way the autumn light painted everything gold, the sensation of laughing without guilt. When she sealed the envelope and walked it to the post office, she felt lighter than she had in months. The next day was Sunday, and Toby invited her to attend church with him. Millicent had been avoiding church services since Samuel's death, unable to bear the well-meaning sympathy and the hymns about eternal life and heavenly reunions. But she agreed to go with Toby, sitting beside him in the simple wooden pew while the minister preached about forgiveness and new beginnings. After the service, several townspeople approached to speak with her. She had met some of them briefly during her months living in La Veta with Samuel, but she had been too wrapped up in her marriage and her own concerns to form real friendships. Now they welcomed her back warmly, invited her to quilting circles and Sunday dinners, treated her like she belonged. Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who ran the general store, took Millicent's hands in her own weathered ones. It is good to see you looking better, dear. You have some color back in your cheeks. Toby has been good for you, I think. Millicent felt herself blushing but could not deny it. He has been very kind. Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. Toby Xavier is one of the good ones, salt of the earth, that boy. I have known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and he has always had the kindest heart of anyone in this town. As Millicent and Toby walked back to the hotel after church, she asked him, "Does the whole town think you are courting me?" Toby looked at her seriously. "Would that bother you if they did?" Millicent considered the question. A month ago, even a week ago, the idea would have filled her with guilt and confusion. But now, walking beside Toby in the bright October sunshine, she found she did not mind the idea as much as she thought she would. "I suppose it depends," she said carefully. "Are you courting me?" Toby stopped walking and turned to face her, his gray-green eyes searching hers. "I would like to, if you were open to the possibility, but only if you are ready. I do not want to rush you or pressure you into something you are not prepared for. You have been through a tremendous loss, and you need time to heal. I am willing to be patient." Millicent felt her heart flutter in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. "I am not sure I am ready," she admitted. My feelings are still very complicated. But I enjoy spending time with you, and I find myself thinking about you when we are apart. I suppose that is something. That is definitely something, Toby agreed with a soft smile. How about this? We keep doing exactly what we have been doing. Spending time together, getting to know each other, being honest about our feelings. We do not have to put a label on it or make any decisions about the future. We just see where it goes naturally. Relief flooded through Millicent. I would like that very much. They resumed walking, and Millicent was acutely aware of how close Toby walked beside her, of the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers. When they reached the hotel, he tipped his hat to her like a gentleman, but there was something in his eyes that made her stomach flip pleasantly. "I will see you tomorrow," he asked. "Tomorrow," she confirmed. Over the following weeks, Millicent's feelings for Toby deepened gradually but unmistakably. She found herself looking forward to seeing him each day, found her mood lifting when he appeared at her hotel to take her riding or walking or simply sitting on the hotel's front porch talking. He made her laugh with stories about the horses he trained and the people in town. He listened with genuine interest when she talked about her dreams and fears and memories. He never tried to replace Samuel or make her forget him. Instead, he gave her space to heal while also showing her that there were good things still ahead in her life. One crisp morning in early November, Toby took her to see the ranch where he worked. It was a modest operation about 5 miles outside of La Veta, owned by a man named Ben Cooper who raised horses and a small herd of cattle. Toby lived in a small cabin on the property and served as the ranch's horse trainer and general hand. "It is not much," Toby said as he showed her around, "but it is home. I have been working for Ben for 6 years now, ever since my father passed away and I sold the family place in town. I like it out here. It is peaceful." Millicent looked around at the sturdy barns, the corrals where horses grazed peacefully, the cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. The whole place had a feeling of solid contentment, of a life built on honest work and simple pleasures. She could easily picture Toby here, rising early to feed the animals, spending his days training young horses, coming home to his cabin in the evening tired but satisfied. "It suits you," she said. Toby looked pleased. "Would you like to see inside?" The cabin was small but neat. One main room with a kitchen area, a small bedroom visible through an open door, and a fireplace that filled the space with warmth. Toby put coffee on to boil and showed her around with an endearing mixture of pride and self-consciousness. Millicent noticed small details that revealed his character. The books stacked carefully on a shelf, the intricate rope work decorating one wall, the clean dishes drying by the sink. They sat at his small table drinking coffee, and Millicent felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was so different from the life she had imagined with Samuel, from his grand dreams of striking it rich and building a mansion in Denver. This was quieter, simpler, but somehow more solid, more real. "Can I ask you something?" Toby said, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "Of course." "Do you think you will stay in La Veta, or will you go back to Denver?" It was a question Millicent had been avoiding thinking about too directly. She had told Louise she would only be staying a week or two, but it had now been more than a month. She knew her sister would be expecting her to return soon, to resume the life she had started building in Denver. But the thought of leaving La Veta, of leaving Toby, made her heart ache. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have obligations in Denver. My family is there, and I have students who depend on me for piano lessons. But I find myself not wanting to leave here. I feel more like myself in La Veta than I have since before Samuel died." Toby reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I would very much like it if you stayed, but I understand if you need to go back. I just want you to know that if you did decide to stay, you would not be alone here. You would have me, for whatever that is worth." Millicent squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. "That is worth a great deal." That night, lying in her hotel bed, Millicent thought seriously about what staying in La Veta would mean. She would need to find permanent lodging and a way to support herself. She could perhaps give piano lessons here too, though La Veta was much smaller than Denver and there would be fewer potential students. She would be giving up the security of living with Louise, the familiarity of Denver, the proximity to her parents, but she would gain Toby. She would gain these mountains and meadows that were beginning to feel like home. She would gain a chance to build a new life free from the pitying glances of everyone who had known her as Samuel's wife. The decision crystallized over the next few days. Millicent sent a letter to Louise explaining that she had decided to stay in La Veta, at least for the winter, to see if she could make a life there. She asked Louise to send her remaining belongings and assured her sister that she was making this choice with clear eyes and a sound mind. She did not mention Toby in the letter, not yet. That felt like something to share in person or at least to wait until she was more certain of where their relationship was heading. With the decision made, Millicent felt a surge of energy. She needed to find a place to live and a way to earn money. Mrs. Patterson at the general store told her about a small house at the edge of town that was available for rent at a reasonable price. It belonged to a widow who had moved to Santa Fe to live with her daughter, and it was simple but well maintained. Millicent went to see it and immediately felt it was right. 2 rooms and a kitchen, a small parlor with a fireplace, and best of all, a tiny spare room that would be perfect for giving piano lessons. She negotiated a reasonable rent and signed a 6-month lease, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by her commitment. Toby helped her move in, carrying the few belongings she had with her from Denver and building furniture from rough lumber for anything she lacked. He built her a proper bed frame, a bookshelf, and a bench for students to wait on during lessons. Watching him work with his hands, seeing the care he put into making things sturdy and beautiful, Millicent felt her affection for him deepen into something stronger. Word spread quickly in La Veta that Mrs. Fairchild was offering piano lessons, and Millicent was surprised by the number of people who inquired. The town was bigger than she had realized, with several families who wanted their daughters to have musical education. Within 2 weeks, she had 6 regular students and a waiting list for more. Between the lessons and her modest savings, she would be able to support herself, at least for now. As November progressed and the weather turned colder, Millicent settled into her new life with growing confidence. She taught piano in the mornings and early afternoons, spent her evenings reading or sewing or sometimes visiting with other women in town. And whenever Toby had free time, they spent it together. Their relationship was deepening in ways that both excited and frightened Millicent. She could no longer deny that she was falling in love with him. It was different from what she had felt for Samuel. That had been passionate and all-consuming, a whirlwind romance that swept her off her feet. This was steadier, built on genuine friendship and mutual respect. She loved Toby's kindness, his quiet strength, the way he made her laugh, the way he listened to her with his full attention. She loved how safe she felt with him, how he never pressured her or made demands but simply offered his presence and support. One cold afternoon in late November, Toby arrived at her house with a Christmas tree he had cut from the forest. "I know it is early," he said, stomping snow off his boots on her porch, "but I thought you might enjoy having it up for a while, make the place feel more like home." They spent the afternoon decorating it with strings of dried berries and popcorn, simple paper ornaments Millicent cut from old newspapers, and candles carefully secured in tin holders. When they were finished, the little tree looked festive and cheerful in the corner of her parlor. Millicent made hot chocolate, and they sat by the fireplace admiring their handiwork. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed the holidays," Millicent said softly. "Last Christmas, Samuel was preoccupied with his mining claims, and I felt so lonely even though we were together. The year before that, we had just arrived in La Veta and barely had 2 coins to rub together. I think I had forgotten that Christmas could be joyful." Toby set down his cup and turned to face her. "Millicent, I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster at the serious tone in his voice. "What is it?" "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for weeks now, maybe longer. I did not plan for this to happen. When I first offered to help you remember joy, I genuinely just wanted to be a friend to someone who was hurting. But somewhere along the way, you became so much more to me than that. I love your strength and your courage. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love the way you tilt your head when you are thinking about something. I love who I am when I am with you." Millicent felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Toby, you do not have to say anything back," he continued quickly. "I know your feelings are complicated and I know you are still healing. I just needed you to know how I feel. I needed to be honest with you." "No," Millicent said, reaching out to take his hands. "I want to say something. I love you too." Saying the words aloud felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and liberating at the same time. She did love him, completely and truly. It did not erase what she had felt for Samuel, did not make that history disappear, but it was real and present in hers. "I love you," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again. I thought Samuel had taken this part of me with him when he died, but you helped me find it again. You showed me that I could be happy, that I could trust someone, that I could open my heart even after it had been broken. I love you, Toby Xavier." Toby pulled her into his arms, and Millicent buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and pine and wood smoke. They held each other for a long time, not kissing yet, just being close and savoring the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Toby cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right. You deserve that." "I would like that very much," Millicent whispered. Their first kiss happened a few days later after Toby took her on a picnic, despite the cold weather. They rode up to the golden meadow where he had first taken her, now covered in a thin layer of snow that made everything sparkle like diamond dust. They spread a blanket near the frozen creek and ate sandwiches and drank hot coffee from a thermos, bundled in coats and scarves against the chill. When they had finished eating, Toby took both her hands in his. "May I kiss you?" The fact that he asked permission, that he gave her the choice, made Millicent love him even more. "Yes," she said. The kiss was gentle and sweet, Toby's cold lips warm from the coffee. Millicent felt warmth bloom through her entire body, chasing away the winter chill. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Toby admitted. "So have I," Millicent confessed. They stayed in the meadow until the sun started to sink, talking about their hopes for the future. Toby told her about his dream of someday owning his own ranch, a place where he could breed and train horses on a larger scale. Millicent talked about possibly teaching music at the school in addition to her private lessons, about writing down some of the songs she composed in her head. They wove their dreams together tentatively, beginning to imagine a shared future without putting too much pressure on it yet. As December progressed, their courtship continued with a sweetness that made Millicent's heart full. Toby came to town whenever he could get away from the ranch, bringing her small gifts. A pretty stone he found on the trail, wildflower seeds for planting in the spring. A hand-carved wooden bird that he admitted sheepishly had taken him 3 evenings to finish. They attended church together every Sunday, went to a holiday social at the town hall where Millicent played piano and Toby requested all her favorite songs. On Christmas Eve, Toby appeared at her door with a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Open it," he urged, his eyes bright with anticipation. Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool dyed a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. But more than that, woven into the edge of the shawl were tiny beads that Toby had sewn on himself, creating a delicate pattern of stars. "Toby, this is beautiful," Millicent breathed, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork. "You made this." "Mrs. Patterson helped with the knitting, but I did the beadwork myself," he admitted. "It took me a while to figure out how to sew those tiny things on without making a mess of it. I wanted you to have something special, something that showed you how much you mean to me." Millicent threw her arms around his neck, the shawl clutched between them. "I love it. I love you." She had a gift for him, too, a volume of poetry she had found at the general store. Inside the front cover, she had written an inscription. "To Toby, who helped me remember that beauty still exists in the world. With all my love, Millicent." They spent Christmas Day at the ranch with Ben Cooper and his family, a rowdy, warm celebration that included too much food and a lively game of charades that left everyone laughing. Watching Toby with Ben's children, patient and playful, Millicent could picture him as a father someday. The thought no longer scared her the way it would have just a few months ago. As the year turned to 1879, Millicent realized she could no longer remember the exact day when she had stopped thinking about Samuel constantly. It had happened gradually, her memories of him fading from raw wounds into something softer and more distant. She still thought of him sometimes, still felt a pang of sadness and confusion when she did. But those thoughts no longer dominated her every waking moment. She had made peace with the fact that she would never fully understand what had happened in her marriage, would never know Samuel's true feelings or intentions. She had chosen to believe in the good moments they had shared, while also acknowledging the betrayal and hurt. Both things could be true at the same time. In early February, on a cold day when the snow lay thick on the ground, and the sky was that brilliant blue that came after winter storms, Toby took Millicent riding out to a piece of land about 3 miles from his cabin. It was a beautiful spot, a small valley sheltered by hills with a stream running through it and good grazing land. "I have been saving for years," Toby said as they sat on their horses looking out over the valley. "Ben is getting older, and he is thinking about selling his place and moving to town to be closer to his daughter. He has offered to sell me some of his horses and equipment at a good price. With what I have saved plus a modest loan from the bank, I could buy this land and start my own ranch. It would be small at first, but it would be mine." Millicent looked at the valley, imagining a house and barn, horses grazing in the meadow, perhaps a garden and some chickens. "It is perfect," she said. "You should do it." Toby turned his horse to face hers, his expression serious. "I want to. But before I make such a big decision, I need to know something. Is there a future for us, Millicent? Because if there is, I want to build this place for both of us. I want to build a home where we can raise a family, grow old together. But if you are not certain about me, about us, I need to know that before I go any further." Millicent's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment where she had to decide whether she was truly ready to move forward, to commit to a new future with someone else. The thought was still frightening. But as she looked at Toby, at his honest, weathered face and his kind eyes, she knew her answer with absolute certainty. "I am certain," she said clearly. "I love you, Toby. I want a future with you. I want to build that home with you, raise a family with you, spend my life with you. I am ready." Toby dismounted in one swift motion and came to help her down from her horse. The moment her feet touched the ground, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Toby pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a simple ring, silver with a small turquoise stone. "It was my grandmother's," Toby said. "It is not fancy, but it has been in my family for 2 generations. Mill."